The idea behind this talk is based on an observation that we've seen inside of AGWA really since the start of the pandemic. I think that implications of the pandemic actually are quite deep for us in many ways. It probably roll out for many years. The neologism here, deep resilience, is what I'd like to explore, and it's really about how there's a convergence that we've observed inside of AGWA between what were once quite separate types of initiatives and approaches. The image here is from Western Sichuan province. It's my favorite single piece of water infrastructure. It's a water wheel that turns a prayer wheel. So it's a spiritual piece of water infrastructure that I thought resonated with the idea of deep resilience. The term deep resilience on one level is a response to a term that I believe was invented in the Netherlands, deep uncertainty. And there are different ways to characterize deep uncertainty. I decided to, on the left, to include the definition from the Society for Decision-Making Under Deep Uncertainty, which is a really good group of academics and practitioners who really worried not just about water, but around a wide range of issues, about what happens when we don't know what the future looks like. I've put in there a kind of technical definition, but done my short approximations on the right side. I don't understand what the future is going to look like. There's not enough evidence for me to plan, prepare, design, or get ready in my actions. How do I choose between alternative futures? Is it going to look wetter, drier, wetter and drier? So deep uncertainty is a really important, it's been a deep challenge, if nothing else, for people that work on things that last a long time or that require a lot of planning and preparation, such as infrastructure, people trying to manage objects or systems that we have low tolerance of for them failing. And water is almost always a deep uncertainty problem. Water and climate problems are, in a sense, inherently wicked problems. And part of that is because the way that we have approached water management up until quite recently is to use the past as a way to predict the future. Climate models, despite improving in some broad parameters, are incredibly imperfect in being able to tell us what the future is going to look like, and they're really bad from a kind of investment perspective, trying to do high confidence planning. They give insight, but often contradictory insight and not with a lot of confidence. One response to deep uncertainty, not deep resilience, but deep uncertainty, has been from the Dutch, and it's to say that flexibility is what we need to respond to. And so one image that people have used is the idea of trying to follow a kind of a meandering pathway. And if we get too far over to one side or the other, we may have a loss of performance, things may decline in efficacy. They may not be able to work very well. Deep resilience, I would say, is an attempt to say that instead of just thinking about flexibility and trying to navigate to avoid being trapped, in effect, that another way to find resilience is actually by taking multiple different categories of a problem and trying to blend them together, that actually by weaving disparate areas, such as energy production, dealing with the pandemic, thinking about ecological resilience, that those are not areas that we've traditionally tried to lump together. But if we do, then ideally we should be able to come up with a more durable, reinforcing, and ultimately resilient solution by finding synergies that are going to cross sectors, institutions, and problems. And I would argue that water is ideally situated for that particular approach. The idea of lumping versus splitting problems, I think, is a really important idea. The way that we've tried to think about problems historically is to divide and conquer them. Engineers are really trained this way professionally, to take a big problem and to make it smaller and smaller until it's more manageable, and you can come up with a really clear, complete solution that nails that problem. I've been playing with some language. I'm a biologist by training. The image on the right side is actually a diagram that compares the evolutionary lineage of different types of frogs in Africa. And one of the topics that is a consistent theme in biology, especially evolutionary biology, is trying to understand, is this one species? Is it 5 species? Are these different populations that are connected? How do we organize them? What is the order that we impose on them? In biology, this is a dialogue that's called lumping versus splitting. Honestly, it has more to do with the personality of the biologist than it does with a kind of underlying reality. But I think that this is actually a helpful metaphor. There is not necessarily a good reason for us to splitting. That actually, in a time when we have really unusual, emergent, novel types of problems, maybe we need to lump instead. And other organizations have started to follow this as a model and doing it quite recently. In Germany, BMZ, for instance, starting in May, they took climate change. The BMZ is the German Ministry for International Cooperation. They took climate change out of their global change silo. I have to say, personally, that was a little bit confusing until I saw that they redefined what health meant. And they have an initiative that's called One Health. And One Health combines human health, ecosystem health, and climate health into a single framework. That's brilliant. And they're really trying to build this lumping approach to how to think about problems. So I'd like to give kind of a quick couple of case studies. One is in a little bit more detail. It's from a city in Thailand, Udon, Thani. It's the second largest city in Thailand. It's up in the northeast. Udon Thani has a distinct identity. They want to be the anti-Bangkok. They're worried that they're going to end up looking like this kind of massive, overchoked, very dirty megacity. And they are at serious risk of that happening. They're essentially at the intersection between Thailand and in China via Vientiane, I think, Laos. So it's the major overland route, and they're growing explosively, as you can imagine. And they have also had some pretty serious climate issues that have started to happen in the region. They have a lot more stormwater, partly because of the growth issues, but also because storm intensification. They have a lot of competition now between hydropower and irrigation. They only have one reservoir in the system. And then they also have this other issue around, is this going to be a nice place to live in 5 or 10 or 50 years? This is the mayor that's on the right side. In cooperation with some partners inside of AGWA, he started to go through a major rethink about what are the issues that Udon Thani needs to think about. And the process they followed was a more open stakeholder definition of trying to say, where are we? What do we value? Not starting with climate models or starting with climate projections. Where are we? Where are we headed? And the hope was that this would be a kind of lumping problem. So how do we bring these issues together? It's notable that the city only has a single source of water, at least until quite recently, Wai Luang Reservoir. There have been other groups that have attempted to follow and help support the city and the mayor. They've tended to take an extremely line item approach. In this case, the team used a methodology called CRIDA, Climate Risk Informed Decision Analysis, that was developed over an 8-year period, crowdsourcing inside of AGWA. That's a very stakeholder-driven process to thinking about a water-centric resilience. And the hope was that they would be able to link functions around recreation, urban lakes, and flood risk reduction, especially around stormwater management. The solutions were quite interesting. The big idea that came out of it was that the quality of life issue was quite dominant. And they said, we actually want to make sure that this is a green city. This is a nice place to live. And this circle on the left-hand side, that's a map, all the water and the lakes and wetlands that have been built in the city. They're being built right now. That's an architect's diagram image on the right. But they are moving earth as we speak to be able to build the system. Those are existing canals, the kind of straighter lines, but they have this ring canal, and then they have all of these wetlands. And what they do is they serve as green space for both flood storage, for irrigation, also for livelihoods. It has pulled off a lot of the competition that was existing between the rice agriculture and the hydropower for the city. The city as a whole has deeply embraced this. They said this is kind of a shared vision that we have co-created around urban resilience. And I think the heart of it is this kind of lumping process. Another example is from California. I don't get to show a lot of positive examples from the US, especially for the past few years. Happy to have a nice one now. This is from California's Resources, which about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, adopted this CRIDA approach to thinking about some of the problems that they were having more systematically in the state. The big change that's really happening, we all heard about the fires. I actually live quite close to California. We had big fires here in Oregon as well. That's really from shifts in precipitation. Generally longer droughts, and particularly in California, a kind of long-term loss in what is the largest area of storage, water storage, in the California system, which is snowpack. What that means is, in practice, that the state is becoming flashier. It's the dry periods are getting drier and longer, but when it rains, when there's precipitation, it's rain and then it floods. It's not coming down and staying as snow. And so you have both floods and droughts increasing in the same region. The state in the Merced River Valley, they have developed a program that's called Flood MAR for Managed Aquifer Recharge. And what they are doing in effect is they're transferring the long-term ecological storage that's up in the mountains into groundwater. And the way that they're doing that is they're working with individual landowners, defining specific recharge zones in the Merced River Basin, clearing those out so that there's a little or no damage that occurs when there are floods, but that the water has time to really sink in and pause and go into and recharge the aquifers in that space. So it's actually taking the floodwaters and turning it into an advantage, a way to really shift the storage system. It should be a long-term, very, very viable approach. I think this is a fantastic way of illustrating the lumping process of lumping quite different problems, in fact, opposite problems, and coming up with a kind of common solution to them. This is a course we're interested in getting the word out. CRIDA was published in 2018 by UNESCO, and UNESCO's been a really critical supporter. We also developed it with Deltatis, the Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, the Delta Commission, and the U.S. Army Corps. But we can't do courses anymore, live trainings. So we developed a course. It went live for the first time on 1 November. And just by using LinkedIn and word of mouth, our existing networks, more than 700 users have enrolled in the class. I got a random WhatsApp call yesterday from Finland. But actually, of the 99 countries, the majority of the users are really from sub-Saharan Africa, especially South Africa and East Africa, and from South America. The Caribbean and Central America are also well represented, but it was really nice to see just how this is being picked up and where it's being picked up. Does deep uncertainty matter and deep resilience matter for climate policy? And I would argue that it matters very strongly. The next two slides really involve Catherine Farr, an AGWA associate, a rock star in this space. This is a document that has just been published by UNDP. It has the really exciting title of Water Interactions to Consider for NDC Enhancement. It's really a series of checklists for people who work on NDCs to see, which are, of course, the kind of main engine for the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord, to be able to go through the NDCs and make sure that the direct and implicit and virtual water connections that are really critical across and between sectors, that where often water has a strong enabling role, are identified early and really developed. It's something that we worked on very closely with SIWI, with some other partners as well. And this is something that came out last November, if I recall correctly. This is Watering the NDCs. It's a shorter document, and I would call it a more strategic document with a kind of a core set of guidance principles, but along a similar vein, trying to help the folks that are working in NDCs understand how to work across governance levels as well as across sectors and see water in this strong kind of enabling role. What's interesting about this, it's not just a bunch of people from the global north that they came up with this. This is something that we crowdsourced, and we crowdsourced with NDC focal points from around the world. As an organization, we've met the NDC focal points from around 100 countries over the last couple of years, and we've stayed in contact with them. And this is a product of that engagement. And we're also trying to think more broadly. The NDCs are going to be where the Paris Agreement succeeds or fails, that there's no preparation to become an NDC focal point. Someone, I think, basically just points their finger at you in a country and tells you that you're the point person now. That's unfortunate. It's the reality. But if you were going to get training, where would you go? With the UNFCCC, AGWA has been developing a curriculum with 3 regional universities in the Americas, Oregon State University, IHE Delft for Africa in Europe, and AIT, Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok for Asia, Australia, and Oceania. And we picked 3 water universities because we knew that we needed that depth of knowledge in those universities to be able to help us think again about the implementation issues. It's also notable that we're trying to think not just about the UNFCCC in its own terms, but how does it interact with the SDGs? How does it interact with the Sendai disaster framework? We're still looking for some additional funding on this work, but so far we have some commitments from the government of Korea and the German government, and moving forward with that. We're hoping to have classes this next year. I just want to end, this is a picture of my son. He's from sub-Saharan Africa. He likes water a lot. He's a lot bigger than that now, but I'm grateful for the chance to talk to you. Thank you.